Hey everyone, this is Chef, and welcome to the Borderlands Chat Ep.3, a monthly World vs. World podcast featuring discussions from other players about our collective experiences in the game mode. In this month's installment, I'm joined by 4 guests, who will introduce themselves shortly, and we'll be having a conversation about off-hours World vs. World communities, groups that play predominantly outside of evening US time zones. We're going to cover a number of topics in this episode, including what different communities make up off-hours, the role that these communities play in World vs. World overall, and the unique challenges that they face in the game mode. So if there's something that you're curious about specifically, you can use the chapter markers in the video description to navigate there directly. If you're excited about more World vs. World podcast content, I'd politely ask you to like the video and leave a comment, as I really do use those metrics to decide what to spend my time on. And if you want to stay up to date on what's going on in World vs. World in the future, consider subscribing to the channel so that you can get these notifications. I think that about wraps up my initial housekeeping, so let's go ahead and get underway. Stoich, Blaze, Sonia, and Squirrel, thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this, considering all of the time zone differences and issues that we've had to work through. Can you each say a bit about yourselves, how long you've been playing, what time zones you play in, and what you prefer to spend your time doing in World vs. World? Stoich, if you wanted to go first.
All right. Hello, I'm Stoich. Mostly I've been known as Pointy Dexter, but more recently as Tony the Squirrel in game. I've spent probably the vast majority of my time in the game as a tag, commander, as you wish. Started out in a PVX guild, VIP. I tagged for them for a couple of years, after which I wanted to do more competitive, more fight-oriented content, if you wish. And so I left and I formed FTL and was main tag for FTL for a long time. Main time I spent commanding was in NA primetime, but recently I've moved back to Bulgaria, which is EU time zone now, so now I tag in EU time zone. I don't have as much time anymore to tag, so I tag a couple of times a week. I used to tag pretty much every day. Mostly, in terms of content, it's fights. And that's about it. When I started commanding, I was interesting to a degree in doing, winning skirmishes, winning matches, whatnot. Initially, there was a little bit of interest in it, but that faded very quickly. And the only thing I've really done is fights. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. Blaze and Sonia, if you guys want to go next.
Hi, I'm Blaze, and I tag mainly during seed time, 9 to 11 Eastern. I started tagging about 7 years ago to get extra pips. I started running an open tag again to get more pips, and slowly we've grown. And I tag every day now for about 40 to 50 people who mainly PPT with a bit of fighting over objectives.
And I'm Sonia, and I've been playing since beta, and I met Blaze in the Halloween lab, and I joined her when I was off work. I usually play NA, but when I met Blaze, I started playing SEA with them because she has a community of people who work night in North America and play during the day. And there's a lot of, like people who don't work or people who play before work who play with GD. And I will tag for her if she needs relief, but I'm generally just a senior support and good lieutenant.
Great, and then Squirrel, if you wanted to go last.
Yeah, I'm Killer Squirrel. I'm the lead guild leader for SoX. We started in Guild Wars 1 as a JQ and Luxon guild. We transitioned over into Guild Wars 2, and I've been right about a month before Guild Wars 2 release. I moved from outside of New York City to Sydney, Australia, which changed the time zone for SoX, and we moved to being a World v World or PVX Guild release. And then approximately 6 months to a year after that, we went to WvW only. I've been the main tag for SoX since release. We tag Monday to Friday. It's roughly 5 a.m. US East or 8 p.m. Sydney time. I also have two other commanders that command, here and there. Drayon commands on Mondays and Thursdays Sydney time, and we have just a couple other commanders that command here, there, and everywhere. But I'm the main commander. We also run on Saturdays and Sundays when we have content and time. SoX is mostly fight guild, we don't use that term lightly because in OCX there's not a ton of content. So our main objective is to, manifest some type of content in fights, and then PBTs, really not a factor in OCX anymore because of the limited points that we generate for the server, so it's pretty much irrelevant. I'd say I'd probably be one of the longest standing commanders in the OCX time slot.
Great, that's excellent. So let's kick things off a little bit here with a discussion on what it kind of means to be off-hours players. I think the population, as a lot of you have kind of mentioned, tends to be higher in NA Prime, and I think a lot of the time when people talk about World versus World, they kind of talk about NA Prime as like the de facto World versus World experience, and I know that that's something that I'm guilty of as well. But outside of these hours, which generally range from like 8 p.m. Eastern to 2 a.m. Eastern roughly, is what most people think of as NA Prime, there's actually a lot of different time zones and regions and players who exist in those different time slots. So for each of you, because each of you is kind of coming from a different pool of players that play at different times, what is the game mode like during OCX hours, during C hours, and during EU hours, and how is it the same or different from NA Prime, given that a lot of you have some prior experience with NA Prime as well?
I can kind of start this off if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
So during the, and I'll speak for OCX obviously. So, during the OCX time, as far as like let's just go with SoX is concerned, we're probably one of the top 3 to 5 guilds in size. Beyond Gone, Nice, Nerd, those kind of maybe potentially the larger guilds, they may focus more on the PPT side. So I'd say we're probably one of the largest fight guilds in the OCX time slot. With OCX, we all know I'm sure I know in NA everyone knows, on Prime everyone knows pretty much all the commanders, but we know all the commanders. We know when we've been fighting against each other for years and years. We have our own Discord, because we are so tight knit, and there's less than 10 of us really when it comes down to it. 15 of us like at a clip. But so because of that, we know where each other are. We know where where the content's going to be during that that month, and we have weeks that we can look at the spreadsheet and just be like, we're going to have no content this week. There's going to be no one else out there. If there are, it's going to be for SoX, it's going to be really small scale, meaning less than 10 people. And not in no disrespect, that's not enough content for us when we're fielding 25 plus, and that's 25 to 35 is really around the ballpark of what SoX fields, and that's again in the OCX time slot considered a large guild. Okay, considered a large fight community. So for that, like our content needs to be we need to have 20 plus. If someone calls out in map chat that there's 7 people hitting Gary when we're on EB, for us to move all the way to Gary to defend Gary during an OCX time slot when points mean almost nothing, it would take more. It's more effort for us to go all the way over to Gary and defend it with the entire squad than for us to say how many people that are out there can handle it without the main group going. You know what I mean? Can we send 5 or 6 people to go handle it rather than the entire group going. Just because there's no point to run after 5 or 6 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and even if you do respawn, I mean, we have these issues in NA Prime too, where, you know, we'll have 5 people on a tower and you'll be running a squad of 30, and it's not really worth anyone's time to go and respawn to that tower, because the group of 5 is going to run away. The group of 30 is too big to catch them, and nobody ends up having any fun. But, you know, in these smaller time zones, there's just fewer players to go around.
Yeah, and like I said, the points don't matter much. I think we throw 3 points an hour, 3 points a skirmish. Sorry, you know. So for us to go there for, you know, unless it's tier 3 and it's going to be, you know, really tough. Okay, you know, they maybe will have a look at it, but you know, I'd say in a month's time, we may get, you know, during a SoX Prime, you know, which is OCX Prime, we may have, you know, 1 queue in a full month. That, you know, map queue, that's population, you know what I mean, that's what we're looking, and we're, you know, I understand there's other guilds that out there, you know, Gone is bigger, you know, nice when Claire Commands is, you know, has a really big group, you know, and Nerd may queue maps as well, but we may queue a map once, like it may be once a month, and that's it. So
I find that with GD, we are the queue. We run really big for what we are. Like we mainly PPT, but we'll fight over an objective. I don't really like to fight, I'll be honest. But I will fight over the objective, but we are the queue. And to respond to anything as well, like, I mean, they just run away from us because we're just so big.
yeah, that's a massive problem that we have as well. It's, I mean, most guilds, as soon as we show up on the map, if we're, like I said, we're defending Gary and we show up on the map, as soon as we show up on the map, they're gone. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not relevant for us to send, like I said, send 30 people after, you know, 10 or 15. It's a waste of time for us. So
that kind of matched the group sizes and overall activity that you see in the EU time slot as well.
Let me chime in a couple of minutes because it's a little bit noisy on the street right now.
Sure, no problem. I can move on to the next topic, but I think it'll be pretty easy to segue us back into that one when you've got it a little more calmed down where you're at. So,
yeah, a couple of minutes.
Yeah, for sure. We can work around that. So, one of the defining features of these off-hour skirmishes that we've all kind of talked about is that the player base outside of NA Prime is just naturally smaller. It's NA Prime because that's where most of the players are. And because World versus World is such a large-scale social PvP game mode, the number of players that you have available, both as allies and as enemies, kind of shapes what you're able to do in the game in the first place. So, you know, Squirrel, you've kind of mentioned that score doesn't really matter anymore. Blaze has mentioned that they just happen to be the biggest group on map all the time. How does that kind of change the way that you engage with World versus World? And how does it change the way that you play and you approach what it is that you do while you're, you know, fighting in the mists?
I kind of go for seriously. I hate to go first every time, but we try to work around, like, okay, based on, you know, we have kind of a core group of you know 15 to 20 people roughly that come on, you know, every single night religiously. Doesn't matter, you know, what's going on, and they tend to be like, you know, the officers, the class masters, and a few people that are, you know, here and there, and then from there, if, you know, for example, last night, you know, HK had, you know, a pretty big group on, you know, you kind of put out the call, hey, there's content, you know, come on down, and people come out of the woodwork. So we'll go from, you know, 15 to 20 to 35 in a clip, you know, in a heartbeat. And then from there, it's kind of, because people don't want to, it's going to sound, you know, may sound disrespectful, but they don't want to come out to PBT, especially during, you know, OCX time, where, like I said, we throw no points. So for them to come out just to PPT, and these are players, a lot of the people in SoX have been around for, you know, plus 5 to 10 years. For them to come out to PPT, for them it's just boring. Okay, I mean, like, they have everything that they need that they could have collected in World v World. You know, their rank is, you know, not something that they have to worry about. Like, they don't need to, you know, they have the legendary equipment, they have all that stuff that, you know, perks that would bring them into the WW. space. So without the content, it's pretty much irrelevant, and they just don't show up. So on those smaller nights, we may, we're sub, 18 people. Whereas when there's content, we go off. So there's kind of like, I'm managing the space of like, okay, how many people are we fighting? Is there content? Is it, bigger, same size, bigger than us? And then, okay, who do I need to contact now? Who's usually kind of hanging around, maybe playing another game, doing something else, not in Guild Wars, that, I can shuffle in and bring over. And, those people, bots and Dre and, Q/, and, Dylan, a couple other people that kind of hang around in the mix and that are really good players, but we don't need when we, we're not fighting content. So I think that just in that space, that's kind of a bigger management for us, is people that could play but don't play unless there's content. So because like I said, we could have full weeks or several weeks or a month where we have almost no content, or the content is just cloudy and not real fun to fight against. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I definitely think that there's, NA parallels there as well, but the advantage that NA Prime has is there's just more groups to select from. If we don't want to fight a Cloud group, we can go to another Borderland, but if an OCX group doesn't want to fight Cloud, you're either waiting until next week, or you might even be waiting until next month.
Yeah. And that's because of there's just a lack of commanders during the OCX time. There may be a population, like for example, last week, we had a pre reset. There was a population of red, but there was no commander to command. So they would just kind of like they just kind of were all over the place. Sometimes they would group up. Sometimes they were a Cloud. So it was kind of really hard to manage what was going to happen from them, and then how that was going to look from our side, and then manage expectations of the squad. Guys, is this a free for all? Or is we're fighting? Where how close do we have to be? What do we have to be working on? To manage this scenario as far as a fight side, and as like the people's player expectation of like what we're going to be getting for content. You know what I mean? And whether they should be showing up, or is this a quote unquote waste of their time to be around for something that's not fight content, right?
Right. So Sonia and Blaze, you guys kind of have a different perspective, because you're more on the PPT side of things, where Squirrel's more on the PPK side of things. And I feel like, while you do like taking approaches that involve fights around objectives, PPT is a little more insulated from activity issues than PPK is, because Tower Lords are online 24/7. So what's your kind of perspective on how the C time zone fares in terms of the activity that it has, and how does it kind of change the way that you think about what you're going to do on any given night in World versus World?
Well, like I said, we usually run big because we are typically the only tag. So, I mean, there's people out there that want to do things, whether it be fights or PPTing. Like I said, I sometimes have to set up a side squad because there are people that want to play and do things. But we often end up doing a lot of guild missions. We ensure that everybody gets their weeklies done. We'll hit things just so people can get their weeklies. And if we're in the mood to fight, we'll hit a Gary and just see what we can draw from hitting the Gary.
And Blaze is not mentioning the fact that she's actually a big World versus World trainer guild. She takes a lot of people who are new to World versus World and gets them a War Claw and introduces them to the things that they do, and they will often go on to other guilds and maybe more fight oriented, because we're also aligned with Banna, so they might want to play more with Banna if they want more detailed fights or more into that. But it's a guild, it's a PPT guild that fights. So, and also with, damage cap, sometimes people don't want to fight us. Sometimes it's just sheer size, and sometimes we just mow them because you can, so it kind of depends what's going on with it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you find that when you're kind of engaging in that fight guild content, that you find other servers that are able to muster a response, or is it usually that you're taking empty objectives and you're largely unopposed, except for a couple people kind of hazing out on a wall?
It's usually the siege. Mm-hmm. So we'll hit that Gary and there'll be 10, 15 defenders, but they're killing us with siege.
Yeah, right. It's a significant change from before. the siege changes. We used to be able to take objectives. We actually can't take a tier 3 carry anymore. With 50 and 10 defenders, you just can't with the siege changes.
Okay. Stoicher, you're doing good on audio over on your end. You got any ability to chime in at this point?
I mean, audio is fine. I'm just gonna be home like in 2 minutes.
Gotcha.
If you want me to just switch over, and it'll be a lot easier.
Yeah, we can do that. That sounds perfectly fine to me. So
Then I'll swamp you.
Yeah, for sure. So for the extent that, Squirrel, Blaze, and Sonia, you guys have also kind of played in NA here and there. I know that all of you have kind of played in NA less recently, but how does it kind of compare between coming from the NA prime time slot to coming to an off hours time slot in terms of the range of activities that are available to you and the overall kind of level of activity that exists during your current time zone?
So you kind of have to find your content. Before I played with GD, I used to play with Dent. And EBG is EBG for a reason. You can always find fights there. So if you want to find something, you generally can. But since alliances came in, people have left during this time zone. And I think part of it is the points and part of it is just the game itself. So there's just not as much content for people who want to have those fights, kind of like what Squirrel was saying before. Sometimes you're the only person out there, and you can't do that. And that's clearly not the case for NA. But also it's how the alliances are paired. I mean, if you look at the alliance pairing right now, you're going to see that there's some teams have 24, 25, 26 guilds, and some have 20, 10, 12, and the pairs don't work right now. I don't know what the metric is for putting them together, but between the points and the pairing, it's very different. But both of those things, it's the time zone and the alliance and not the alliance, it's how you're paired. Makes a big
The
difference.
shard that you wind on, or the team that you wind up on. And we're going to get to how restructuring has influenced that explicitly, probably in about 10 minutes or so. So if you have restructuring specific thoughts, put a pin in them for just a little bit, because we're going to cover that explicitly.
Yeah, and I don't know if everyone knows this. We have kind of a Neb, Allengate, Logan, one of our guild leaders, have kind of put together. Neb is with Late. Allengate, she works with. She's built help us build the bot inside of SoX. They built a spreadsheet that's specific to OCX and C, and I don't even know if NA players know that exists. But it allows us to track where the other guilds are. And how kind of like the matchup and the way that the old matchup system used to work. Now it gives us the ability to see that on a spreadsheet and where things are, as well as like where the C guilds are and the alliances and how they track with that as well. So it's good to have, especially because in that point, we had really nothing before. And Ned was pretty quick on getting that up when Restructure started. But I mean, we could have, like I said before, we could have weeks where we have nothing. So the difference in what that is for NA, even if we're on, and I think Sonia and Blaze hit on it, like we kind of joke that EB is SoX BL, right? We tend not to leave, EB. Unless the content leaves or the group that we're fighting says, hey, we're lagging, can we go to a BL? Can we fight someplace different? And that's just simply for the reason that there is always that content there, or actually a better way of saying is there's a better chance of there being content there. And it was something that has been brought up. I brought up in the past, with some differentiations. Is there a way to get more content into one place rather than having it just between EB, like edge of the mist type scenario where it doesn't matter what server you're on, it can actually still create content. You know what I mean?
Yeah, EB is kind of like a natural gathering place when you're not sure where else to go, but if you had some kind of means of being able to fight players from other teams so that you weren't just locked to the other two teams that you're actually fighting with that week, that would be a good way to kind of expand the amount of enemy population and allied population that you have access to, so you can solve some of those numbers.
Yeah.
If I can jump in,
Yeah, go for it.
finally set up.
Yeah,
So
give us the rundown for
in general,
EU.
People were saying earlier that there's lack of commanders. I think this is not an off-hours thing. There's just a general lack of commanders, especially when it comes to fight content. There just isn't that many, and restructuring has really made it a lot worse. Not all of it is on ArenaNet. Part of it is on the community as well, because you have fight guilds that are aligning with each other and they're in the same alliance. So now when they get placed on a shard, you have 4 or 5 fight tags that are together that generally run in the same time. And so you're taking all of these people off the board because there isn't another fight tag that will come up and can fight them on the other side. So you end up with a lot of shards that actually don't have the commanders, that even if there's people to command to make the fight competitive. And you get this great disbalance. So, I mean, this has started happening in NA as well before I moved over, where you have a lot of pugs on a map, but they're not joining in. And so you end up fighting with 20, 25 versus a full map blob because it's an alliance blob on the other side. So a lot of the fight content has become very disbalanced, and it's happening a lot more rarely now than it used to. And off hours is just a crapshoot. Whether you'll get like fights, you literally need to get lucky. EU time is not much different. There's a little bit more people. EBG tends to be pretty full. But again, you get a lot of people that don't join in, squads. I'm not even talking about comms. You don't really have that many puck tags. In the puck tags you have, they don't do fighting. So this is essentially the main reason. I think points and stuff, they contribute a little bit, but they're not as important because there is no point to winning a match. As long as there is no point to winning a match, whether you're winning skirmishes or not, it doesn't really matter, unless you want to get out of tier 4, because the things get stale as you have to say you fight against the same people over and over again. But now with the sort of the relinking, reshuffling, if you wish, that happens more often, even that's not as much of a problem as it used to be. Like before, if you get stuck in tier 4 for 2 months, second month is really shitty at that point. Excuse my language. But now it's first week is random. By the time you drop to tier 4 or whatnot, it doesn't really matter as much. Winning matches doesn't matter. We can beat around the bush, but it just doesn't matter. So there's no point to put in effort to win skirmishes to score points. And no matter the amount of points that you assign, as long as it doesn't matter to win matches, it just doesn't matter. The other thing I would add is that the only content, because of that, the only content you have in WvW is other players. That's it. And that's why we're talking about whether there's players or not that you can fight. And that's the issue with it. And so because the only content is other players, now the only reason you have going into the game mode is to kill other people, and obviously everybody wants the easiest way to do it. So there is no incentive to actually create a competitive atmosphere. Like the structure of it is like that. Now, people can go out of their way to try and do it, but that becomes a hard thing, especially in an old game. So I think the main issue that sort of from the side of the developer is how to create that incentive first for more players to want to be tags, because it's not glorious to be a tag, to be honest. It takes a lot of effort, energy. You have to put up with a lot of shit sometimes. Again, excuse my language. And the reward for it is not always there. Like there's times when there's like great fights and great runs. It doesn't always have to be wins. If the fights are good, like they're competitive, they're hard fights. Like you can feel that, you know, you lose some, you win some. That's a good night. Everybody feels good for both sides. But that's happening less and less often nowadays. That's my feeling. And moving to EU, it's just basically, it's not that much different from NA in that respect. It's just, it's more to the extremes.
Yeah, and just to clarify specifically, we're talking about the EU time zone on NA servers. We're not talking about
yes.
EU.
I mean, we're all talking NA servers here, right?
Yeah. But just to clarify, in case there's EU people watching,
right, yeah.
I did try and track down a couple people who play OCX and C and NA Prime on EU servers, but it seems like there's even fewer people doing that on EU than there are playing off hours on NA, and I wasn't really able to track anyone down. So.
Well, since I not even since alliances, but even before, what I would have is I would have people that are from other time zones that are running with us in NA Prime, because that's when you actually get the opportunity to have fight content.
Yeah, like that's the full scope of the game mode.
So they're going out of their way to sort of play in hours that are not natural for them, because that's when the content is. And because of that, that's exasperating. Like it's not as much that there isn't like that sort of players have disappeared from those other time zones. They're sort of moving into NA time zone because that's when there's a greater chance to actually get content. And that's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, flipping towers, I'm saying this because I started as a PPT commander. I essentially started commanding because it was the same week that they introduced the war claw. I don't know, that was like, 5 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
And there was a need for a tag for people to just run to get their war claws. And so I started tagging. And I kind of enjoyed it, and it was, it was interesting and stuff. And I was doing exactly that. I was flipping towers, I was running around. Whenever there was a fight, I would fight. But it was a PVX guild, so that was sort of the limitation. It was not NA primetime. It was basically late EU, early NA time. But you sort of you get a taste for fights, and then you want more, and you get tired of flipping towers eventually. As a commander, I can say as a commander, for me, that's what happened. So at a certain time, for me, it was like I either, give up on the game, or I try to, get into NA primetime so I can have fights. And that was the decision. That's why I left, VIP, and I started FTL and all of that. And that was the reason. And unfortunately, it's really, there isn't that many fight tags to begin with, and there's generally not enough tags, and there isn't really an incentive for it. I think they would be better served to be doing sort of the balancing of teams based on the commanders that they're placing on the different charts. Like, you actually need to have a better balance of commanders, and then the players will sort of work around that better. The one thing that previously servers had before was that all servers had some commanders around which they would congregate. So you always had some commanders on a server. Even the servers that were really dead, they still had a couple of commanders that people can congregate around. And so there was the possibility that content can, erupt in a way. Now with the way they do linking, sometimes there's shards that it's complete desert. Like there's just nobody around which people can run. And a lot of the fight guilds, they don't run open. So even if you have like a few fight guilds, you don't really have access to commanders. And that's the biggest issue right now. So you have a large population of players that they just log in, they get on EBG. They're not used to joining into squads. They just follow a commander without joining squads, and they just die. and they don't know why. And you have that sort of that stepping stone that has been cut off, and so people join the game mode, they don't learn and they don't improve to the point where they can join like the groups that actually run and do the fighting and do all of that. And so for them, that experience is just chaotic, a lot of dying, they don't know why, they don't know what they're doing wrong, and there's no way for them to learn unless they join in a squad, and even better if they join in a in comps.
Mm-hmm. And start to get kind of that perspective on what organized world versus world looks like instead of
exactly, because
like
ultimately that's what world versus world is for. Like if you want to do really small scale fighting or one-on-one fighting or that's SPVP. It's right there. There's a game mode for it. Like I don't understand the Magoo McCloud for that reason. All of them are solo players that just swarm or whatnot. Well, if you want that kind of gameplay, there is a game mode, which is a lot better structured.
I would say
exactly
that Magoo was much bigger than 5v5 at this point, but
oh yeah,
that's a separate issue.
Each of them is playing the way you have a 5v5 fight in SPVP. I would say maybe a good way of doing things is to introduce like a 10v10 in SPVP.
Well, this is gonna. I'm looking at. I'm looking at time, and I'm like, oh, we should probably move on to next topic. But
right. Okay.
Now I'm like, maybe we just go for an hour and a half, depending on whether you're available. Because I'm wondering if any of you played the beta for the push game mode, because it sounds like push might be some of the stuff that you're describing.
I haven't, to be honest, I haven't really had as much time over the past couple of months with moving countries and everything. So
we'll put a pin in that one, because that one starts to get pretty far afield of just talking about off-hours communities. But okay. Yeah, I think it would be a net benefit for the game mode, because a lot of us have kind of talked about how the things that we want to do in World versus World are limited by some of the structural issues that the game mode has. Things like time zone, things like score, things like matchup and population and things like that. And, at the end of the day, the goal is to have fun doing the things in Guild Wars 2 that we want to do. Not necessarily that we have fun doing them in World versus World specifically. So, other game modes that better cater to the style of play that we all kind of want to engage with, whether that's in World versus World or in something else, might end up being a net benefit for the game mode overall, because somebody quitting Guild Wars 2 entirely is kind of the worst outcome for a game mode that thrives on player activity and player content. But in terms of, I do want to advance this discussion just a little bit, because we've danced around the issue of restructuring a couple times, and I've said, let's just wait, we'll get to that point. Let's go ahead and just get to that point, because I think all of us have kind of talked about the role of restructuring in World versus World at one point or another. So, a brief history lesson for people who may have only played World versus World for the last year or so. Prior to the launch of Restructuring, which was last June, World versus World used a series of static servers rather than teams that are generated dynamically every month like they are now. And the way that manifested for off-hours communities is there were servers that had a reputation as being havens for off-hours. Places like Sea of Sorrows, places like Jade Quarry and Blackgate during the seasons basically achieved Season 1 due to their off-hours presence, while other servers had more of a stacked NA Prime population, servers like Dragonbrand, or just were small servers in general, like Crystal Desert or Sorrow's Furnace. And so these servers tended to build up a community and a reputation of being, there's going to be lots of off-hours players here, we either want to be on that server or we want to fight them. And Restructuring now kind of distributes those groups further afield, and it makes it harder to make those connections. So, for each of you in your own time zones, has Restructuring made the experience of playing in your time zone better or worse, and how has it affected the social landscape of the game mode as well as the content landscape of the game mode?
It's funny that it's funny when you brought up that, like, Sea of Sorrows, SoX was released on CSROs when the game when Guild Wars was released, and we kind of called it home or home base quite a lot. We did move, we moved a lot, probably once a year or so. We moved servers, so we've been all over the place. We were all over the place pre that, but we were on C, and I remember per OCX, and I'm sorry, CSRs, and I remember at one point we had left. I think we were on Aerodon Terrace, which was a pretty, at that point, very low population server in the scheme of things, both low in NA and OCX and C. There was almost no population on that server, and when we moved there, we thought it would be great to move there because of that, but it turned out that like it pinned us in tier 4 where there was no content.
Yes.
Right. So we didn't end up with anything anyway. So our immediate move, when asked to the guild, was, where do you want to go? Everyone's like, let's just go back home to SOS, right? Well, as soon as we did that, the eruption from the OCX community, like, it tarred us. Like, SoX was tarred and feathered because we moved back to SOS, which is like the OCX population. And I think at that point, when we were gone, that's when Claire started to develop Nice as a really one of the largest PPT OCX guilds. So that put now one of the larger PPT guilds on a server with one of the in OCX, one of the largest PPT OCX guilds on the same server with one of the largest OCX fight guilds on one server. It then pinned us in first place because points, we were getting points from both PPT and PPK, right? We were getting, and points were even back then. So we were just getting, like, everyone hated us. Like, it was like, you ruined the OCX time slot, SoX Squirrel, by doing this. And it was a hard thing to take. I'm like, listen, we moved back because when we left a whole population of SoX people there that all wanted us to come back. We came back to home, So in this, like, how that changed in restructuring, there's pluses and minuses in that restructuring for us. Like, one, we got to pull everybody together, people that were loyal to a server. We had people when we were on JQ that were so fiercely loyal to JQ that they loved SoX, but they didn't want to move with us. So we actually back then created a sub guild, called it SoX 2, which is Standard of Ra instead of Standard of Heroes, right? That guild was literally for other people that played with SoX, wanted to stay members, but were not going to be able to be on the same fight server we were on, right? So when restructuring came around, it was like, oh, great, we can pull all these people together now. So we just kind of like literally just scooped everybody. So our population, almost doubled for restructuring.
Yeah, because you get to pick up all these people that are. We had a similar issue in Knights of the Temple or K&T. I try to not insert myself into the podcast too much, but K&T was an original Blackgate guild, and I think in like 2016 or something like that, they started doing some transferring around. They went to YB, they went to Kaining, and eventually settled on Fort Aspenwood. But there were so many people who either stayed on Blackgate or left an account on Blackgate and got a brand new account just so that they could play with K&T somewhere else, but leave that connection to Blackgate intact. That, people had such fierce loyalties to their original servers that sometimes they would stay on the server even when the guild left.
And I think there was that, not just Blackgate, BG was that server that if you left it, you had a very good chance you were you're never going to get back to it. So it's like, like, I have to, like, there's that thing too, like, if you're leaving, crap, I want to go with the guild, but I can't really, because if I leave this server, I'm never going to come back to it, and that did happen with SOS at the time. There were times when we had left and gone back and forth, and we had to kind of plan our, moves in and out, because you couldn't leave the server that you were on because it was either going to be perpetually locked. SOS, BG, there was a lot of them that were, perpetually locked for large portions of time, that if you wanted to get someone that has, say we moved and they'd taken, a month or two off during that, around that move time, when they came back, now they have no one to play with. Now they have to wait. Oh man, I have to wait, 3 weeks, month, plus to get back in, and then when they get back in, they're like, oh, forget it. There's no point in even trying. It took so long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, you do get that restructure every month, which is good because if someone's out, you know what I mean, like, or has to take like a month off, or you know what, they can, and then they can come back in when they need to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is really good. It is positive, but and I think, not to recap things that were said before and go back, but Storage made some really good comments before about there's no points during the OCX time period. And I said this before too, but as far as skirmish points go, it's irrelevant. So we can turn the entire of World v World into our color and PBT the heck out of it, and it's going to be absolutely nothing in the point score.
Right.
So it's going to be in the war score it's going to create nothingness. So there's no point in even doing it. So, and then there's, like you said before, there's no incentive to be a commander. So during that restructuring time, it kind of just tossed commanders that were like, I'm just going to use other commanders that I know are open pin commanders during OCX time, and I'm sure people would know, OBS, or there's a couple of them that are out there that are, open pins that will command during OCX. There's no reason for these guys to command anymore because they were on a server that had a population that worked, but now they could be anywhere. So when they pin up, they may have 5 or 6 people that'll join them because they aren't known as well as they were before, because they were known to that server as someone that, open pin, PBT, would pin up for the server, whether it's PBT or fight or just try to defend things. Now that's irrelevant because there's no incentive for these guys to do this. You know what I mean? Like before, it was the kind of the love of the server that you did it, and there's friends that you had on the server. And unless they created a guild, which most of these, like Storage said, most of these people didn't join the guild, didn't join a squad. They're now in, land that they're kind of just floating all over the place. So do they become part of become part of a cloud, or do they just kind of meander off and fade into the non-existence of the game?
Yeah,
You know
or do
what I
they
mean?
just vanish from the game mode entirely?
So I would say like the biggest difference between restructuring and before was this, and you had this every time you had a new link. Like you go out there and you start tagging, and then the pugs are looking at you from a distance for the first couple of weeks, sort of judging what's happening, right? As a tag, when they don't know you, like if you don't have like a long-standing reputation and whatnot. Because I went through the whole thing. Like I'm one of the few people that, I've been around for 5 years, but in those 5 years, there's very few commanders that have appeared, new commanders, and have become fight tags or whatnot. And so in a couple of weeks time, they start joining your squad, and in about a month's time, they start joining comps. And then you have a month in which everything sort of comes together. With restructuring now, there just isn't enough time for that to happen. And that is with you sort of running all the time, running open squad all the time and whatnot. So it's a really uphill battle for commanders, and I mean pugmanders here, people that run open squad, to actually be able to create the situation in which they can sort of more or less reliably generate a squad with which they can be competitive against others. And enough times it becomes so much more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main issue. And part of it is the way the balance happens. Like this is the thing. I think they're sort of taking hours spent in WvW and sort of balancing number of players off of hours they spend in WvW, which is very quantitative way of balancing, and it's not taking into effect qualitative. The second part to it is the constant changes to balance. Like when you're making changes to skills and mechanics in a way that means that people need to adapt their builds and whatnot, how to play them and all of that. Well, that's all good and fine, but you have a very big disbalance in how players will adapt to this. Like the fight guilds, which have experienced players that have probably played pretty much every class in the game, maybe without Thief, and they've already gone through 50 different iterations of all of these changes back and forth. They're going to adapt in a couple of weeks, and all the builds are going to be shared and whatnot, and they'll be ready. And when you go down the line, though, you go to PBX guilds, you go to PPT guilds and whatnot, it's going to take them a couple of months until they get to the new builds, they learn them, and they start being able to utilize them. By that time, ArenaNet has changed something else. And now they're again 2 months behind the 8 ball. And it makes it really hard for players to actually, again, jump to that fight level. And through attrition, you lose more fight players. They congregate even more with each other. And that sort of thing has been happening for 4 or 5 years. It's not a new problem. It's just that restructuring has speeded up that process because now everything is happening faster.
It shuffles so often. I'm really curious to get Blaze and Sonia's thoughts on this, because I know that both of you explicitly do run open tag, and you kind of have this mentality of being, a training guild and a teaching guild about world versus world. So I'm curious, whether the stuff that Stoich is saying about how the turnover in teams is too fast and things happen too fast in the new restructuring world versus world ecosystem is something that you've experienced as well, or whether your perspective is a little bit different because you tend to lean more towards the PPT side of things than the PPK side of things.
Well, because I lean more towards the PPT kind of things, I find that because scoring doesn't count, PPT guilds aren't as wanted in alliances anymore. So, at one time, having a PPT guild was great because, they were going to generate those points to help us win, but there's, they're just not wanted anymore.
Mm-hmm. And if I can kind of follow up something that Stoich said earlier, he was talking about how when you can drop down to tier 4 and it doesn't matter. Well, it actually does, because this just happened to us because we don't have an NA heavy alliance. We actually have because our guild is so large, and the people who are with us, we don't have a heavy NA pairing on our shard. We sunk, and then we got placed on the exact same team that we were on last month. So we're still in tier 4, and you have the same content, and it is not fun if you actually want to do fight. The appeal of our guild is that you can have high level, medium level, low level players all play together, but when you get stuck in tier 4 and the pairing and how it's done doesn't work, it is a problem. And the cap that they have on the alliances gives you difficulty trying to bring people into your alliance because you're saving spots for people who are in NA because it's such a powerful point system for people who are in NA. So it's kind of like all of us don't really matter in what we do. You're just in it for the fights. And for everyone who's just in it for the fights in NA, you can PPK and get a tremendous amount of points. You get like 33 points, and you can't get 33 points in SEA for a whole month. It's like, I think the scoring doesn't work right now. I understand what they were trying to do, but we're mostly NA players who just happen to play in the morning and are still not rewarded because we're not playing NA primetime. And I find that kind of problem. Socially, it's a relatively similar game, but I think how it turns out, it doesn't always work.
Yeah, and I do see that being a much bigger issue if rewards ever get reintroduced to the game mode, because I do personally kind of fall into the same camp that Squirrel falls in, where really the only point to score these days is controlling what matchup you go to. You might want to try and PPT a little bit to get a fun server to fight next week rather than a dead server to fight next week.
Yeah, exactly.
But, man, as soon as you get something for winning a matchup or a tier or something like that, the experience of just earning less points in OCX and C is going to feel miserable.
And the mechanics of trying to get onto another team for the next shard within a month is really difficult. When you could just spend gems and move, it was easier, and it doesn't happen now. And it's all interrelated to exactly what Storch was saying about commanders and not knowing the commanders and reputations. And the 4-week timeline isn't problematic. It's just that you can't change quickly or move people in and out. You can leave an alliance quickly, but you can't join an alliance quickly.
Mm-hmm.
You said some really good things too, like, you know, and so did Blaze. Like, one of the things she said was like, you know, PPD doesn't matter what it is, you know, what it was before, and especially during OCX. So what that has actually done is actually a lot of the large PPT guilds, actually technically 3 large PPT guilds, 2 were already kind of married together, both gone in rear, have gone into the same alliance. So now in that alliance, it's Gone, Nerd, Oath, and Rear. There's 4 really big PPT guilds in OCX in one alliance. That is, and not, I'm not underselling this when I say that potentially could be the largest population. They've created now the SOS of what it was in the past. And because they had, when restructuring was created, or the idea of it was you want an OCX guild because it's going to give you that, you know, off hours points to even out. Now we went from being like the black sheep of, you know, the community, right, to being even like we've been ostracized even further away.
Yes.
You know, because it's like we were off hours to start with, right? You know, so we weren't as important as NA. We didn't have the population that NA had, so we weren't important in that case either. You know, now, but our value was the fact that we can help out when you guys weren't on. Now you've taken that away from us as well. So what is our value now?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. We have almost no value to an alliance. Exactly what Blaze was saying, and because of that, like, what are we to the alliance? We're nice people that play with them and come on and help out during NA when we can, you know. But as far as like anything else for the alliance, all we are is just like we're holding a point, you know, system. And I'm very thankful for the alliance that we're in with, you know, CO and Grim, that they value us because we're actually people to play with, you know, when they're not playing during NA, which is great because most alliances will look at us now as like, why do we need you guys? You guys have no value to us.
Yeah.
When they initially took away the points from seat time, I was worried our alliance was going to get rid of us for making more room for NA people.
Mm-hmm.
Because
what's the same thing?
Us?
Yeah, and this is all like there's so much stuff to touch on in the OCX and C and EU time zones. Like, one of the things that I wanted to touch on was the dev post by Cecil Armstrong, where he was talking about how off-hours groups can get more favorable matchups and get better treatment from the algorithm by building OCX and C alliances explicitly, rather than these hybrid alliances that cut across time zones. But I find myself agreeing with you on that, Squirrel, where the experiences that I've had with our alliance, where we have Ari and Bunny as off-hours guilds that are in the Cornerstone Alliance, is just a really nice avenue for giving people communities to play with during non-traditional NA prime times. And, you know, my take on it has always been that the social fabric of World versus World is the most important part of the game mode by far. And this idea of having an off-hours guild in your broader alliance to give people this outlet for, you know, hey, I can't sleep tonight, I'm going to log on to Guild Wars at like 3 a.m. and, oh, look, there's a tag in my alliance that's playing. I've always found that to be like a really attractive idea to thinking about how that sort of social fabric of World versus World works. So I am mindful of the fact that we're almost at an hour, and I think it's a credit to each of you as guests that we could probably go for another 40 minutes and have an interesting conversation about some of the issues that impact off hours, and we might end up doing a second episode here. But I think it's probably best to think about wrapping up with sort of some improvements or changes or ways that the play experience could be improved for off hours time slots. I don't.
So you're saying we're going to go for another 6 hours? Because I could probably talk for that long on that.
I would prefer to go and make dinner with my night, so I am going to put some sort of time cap on this. But
Well, no, it's 1 a.m. for me, so, you know, I'm in agreement with you there.
Yeah. But I think, I try to stay relatively optimistic about World versus World, because I figure that if we didn't like the game mode, we wouldn't be spending our time playing it, and we wouldn't be spending our time talking about it. But from the friends that I do have in off-hours communities, it does seem like the state of World versus World is worse for off-hours than it is for Prime right now. Not to marginalize or demean any of your participation in this podcast, but there are so many people who I talk to for potential participants in this interview who declined from C, OCX, and EU time zones because their guild is on hiatus and they've quit and they're just not playing anymore. So
not only that, there's a trajectory of getting worse.
Yeah.
It's not so much that it has declined. There's a sort of a steady trajectory of everything getting worse.
Yeah.
I think that is also true for NA, though at certain time there's like an explosion of activity which sort of maxes it. But overall, and this is part of the reason why everybody's congregating towards NA, is because there's a definite trajectory of lowering the amount of people. One of the things that was masking this before restructuring was that you had people that had accounts on different servers, and so if there isn't content on on FA tonight, they're logging on to their BG account and they're fighting there. And so that was creating sort of the illusion that there's more players actually playing WvW than they are. I think to a large extent, those extra accounts are now staying dormant for a lot of people. And so, in a sense, it seems like the population has declined a lot all of a sudden. But that's not the case. It's just that people are actually playing less their extra accounts, and so they're not engaging with as many groups as they used to before.
Well, it's easier to move around where your one account is now that you just have to check a box. But yeah, I like that framing, and that it's not just a restructuring issue. It's not just a scoring change issue. And it's not just
definitely.
A balance patch issue. It's the game mode is 13 years old.
It's also on the community. Like, let's be honest here. You have alliances that have like 3-4 fight guilds in them. What's the point? Like, guys, who are you gonna fight?
Yeah.
Like, seriously. Why are you like, these are the people you want to fight? That's the competitive, those are the other competitive groups. And there's maybe 20 really guilds that you can call fight guilds, and when 10 of them group up in 2-3 alliances, well, they're gonna see each other maybe once every few months, because there's 12 shards, and they're all congregated on 3-4, and so that's on the community. That's not on ArenaNet, but there is no incentive for competitive play in any way, and that's kind of what I'm trying to say. That this is where the devs can come in and sort of create an incentive for winning matches. That's the first thing. And then create an incentive that will go a long way, but also create an incentive to fight at your own level. So you're not incentivized to just kill a PPT group or a PVX group, which are 30 sweaty guys, because bags are bags. Like, and killing a PPT group is a lot easier than going out and killing another sweaty group, and that's the real issue. That's where all the disbalance comes from.
Yeah.
And the second thing I would say is, when you're balancing, introduce like a qualitative method of balancing players and not a quantitative one. And it's not hard. Like, they tried to do the ELO system, a variation of the ELO systems for servers before, but it didn't work. And it didn't work because you only have so few servers. If you do it on a level of players, it will work. Because you have enough players for that. And you can do it. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a lot better than this. Like, you can do it based off of kills. Like, there's enough sort of general randomness in all of it in there that it's going to be very hard to game the system, and it's going to take a lot more effort to actually game the systems for players than to just accept what's happening. So using that kind of a qualitative system to actually assign value to each player, and that way do some averages for guilds, whatnot, and that way sort of create the links, you're going to end up with a lot more balanced teams. Now, the time zone issue, that's a separate one, which is a lot harder.
I definitely agree with you, but I also feel like to maintain academic credibility, because I am a data scientist in real life, ELO is a very quantitative system. It deals very heavily in numbers. But I don't disagree with you. I think that a better matchmaking system and a better reward structure would be a pretty good incentive to both breaking up some of these mega guilds and also to introducing some more interest in competing in the game mode on axes beyond just, oh, I'm having fun with my friends, which is good and should be the thing that we're concerned with the most. But as long as World versus World lacks some kind of guiding principle or reason or drive to actually want to play.
But I mean, that's the beauty of ELO, because it's heavy on numbers, but it does a very good job in qualitative differentiating.
Mm-hmm. So
and
yeah, go ahead.
But you need to have a lot of participants for it. Like the more participants you have in it, the closer it gets to accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the way the system works. So this is why it doesn't work on a server level. Like you have 24 servers, just not enough servers to get accuracy to a good level. You have 5,000, 10,000, you're gonna get it. I mean, for a game, it will be fine. It will be enough, and it will give a lot better distribution. I guarantee it.
Or even if you just did it like the.
I mean, my whole profession has been, social and market research. So data work is again same for me. But I would say this, like, if they do just that one change, it will invigorate WvW a lot.
I think from an OCX point of view, matchups are irrelevant. Because even if at the beginning of the matchup, say the beginning of the month, right now we're matched. So now SoX right now is currently matched with HK. If we go up, okay, which we're likely going to go up, okay, this week, we're so far ahead already. I think we will likely go up or stay where we are. But if we went up, we're going to have no content. If we go down, we have a better chance of getting content, but the way they split, we may end up with no content. So it's kind of irrelevant because the way everyone's so split around, because they can match us up great in the beginning, but as war score goes through the weeks, it's going to spread people apart anyways, right?
Yeah.
So, and there was conversation about putting all the OCX into one time slot, but then we do lose that community, and that's why we're in the alliance. If we wanted to go it alone, we could. So I look at it as, how can this be fixed? The only way I can see that it can be fixed is by allowing us to, one, stay in the alliance that we're in, by the same token allowing us to still be able to play with other people. And I brought this up before, I know a lot of people didn't like to hear it, or said it was too difficult for ArenaNet to do, but I strongly believe, and this is very controversial, that EOTM is underutilized. Okay, it was the idea of it when it was created, and I was kind of working in a capacity. I was in a capacity that I was able to be in that space with how it was. When it was in the early idea of it, right? It was great. It was going to be an overflow to when you were waiting in queue, you had somewhere to go to fight against other people. Okay. Now, with that same thought process, isn't that what OCX is now? It's that we want to have fights, we want to do something, but we're not going to get that in Worldview World. We're not going to get that in a Borderland. So if EOTM was kind of like a EB, like I see it, my thought was to make it as like an EB across all Borderlands, right? I mean, across all servers. So it didn't matter where you were still adding points to your server, right, for things that you were doing. And this is the difficult thing, right? It doesn't matter because our points are irrelevant. So it doesn't matter if you were getting points in EOTM or an EB. It's irrelevant, but you could still see chat from EOTM to the Borderlands. And then so if you need to go there, great. But you'd have the ability to fight over objectives and still, glide, and mount, and do things, collect the same rewards that you would in EB. It would just allow us to. It doesn't matter what server you're on, you'd still be able to get matched by color. And that was my thought. And I understand the difficulty.
I think it's great, except you have one single problem: is everybody's going to be queuing that map to get on that map because that's where they can get content.
Yeah, but what was good about EOTM was if they queued it, another server was created.
Yeah, it spins up a second instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
You created a whole nother instance. So if
but you're gonna drain the other maps. Like everybody's gonna be going there because now instead of having the possibility of fighting 2 servers, you have the possibility of fighting like 10.
I think that is the biggest concern. That's why they don't turn EOTM back on. Is that
and so everybody's gonna be going there and taking their chances on the new instance rather than going to a half-dead map. Or,
But if there's nothing to do on the Borderlands anyway, what is it?
Yeah,
what does it really
exactly
cost? So
that's exactly my point. Like and I was using this to go back to what I said before about like what we're gonna be, where we could be next week. If we go, up a tier, and there's no content, Slap doesn't end up, fighting against us for whatever reason. We have no content there. So if we stay where we are and late and nice don't come up to fight us, we're gonna have nothing in that space as well. So at least in there, we could say now it was kind of the openness was like, okay, well, you can go in GVG in EOTM in the arena. Okay, it's like, well, not everybody that that's a fight guild in WvW wants to 20v20 or 15v15 in EOTM. But if you had the ability to fight over something, in that, more fight space or, you could do something, yeah, I would. And I understand and I value where you guys are coming from. It's going to pull people from other servers. But if we don't have, there's no ability for us to play against each other, it's a better scenario than playing against that. So I don't know. Is it something that like when, is opened up, like kind of like as the population of World v World goes down, does that become something that's opened up to, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of thoughts around it. I just my biggest thing is it doesn't really matter where you put the OCX guilds at the beginning of the month. By the end of the month, like Gone and Rear, that alliance has almost no NA. They are not going to create enough points to move themselves up. They're just not. Mm-hmm. So they're going to continually fall down where they're the largest OCX population. So because we did this.
And I think that's brilliant, honestly, Squirrel. And because it's a way of trying to create a way to give points to the off-hours people that's valuable and gives to the team. Of course, I'm sure we can all come up with ways where it could be problematic. Like if green's winning on all maps, they're green for a reason generally. They might have an advantage. But if you could do maybe more points on the actual Borderlands, but less points in EOTM, you could still have value to it, and people could go to that. And I also think it would provide a different vibe that you're not just fighting for your team, but you're also fighting for your color, which is going to provide some excitement. And to Stoic's point about it, if it doesn't work, then they turn it off again. But what's the harm in trying it?
It's also
absolutely.
Yeah. It's also a new map with how many people, want to see Alpine BL replaced with another BL. I'd wager that somewhere between 80 to 85% of World vs. World players have probably never gone to EOTM, so being able to go there for the first time and explore for a bit is kind of like getting a new map.
And to be fair, it's a really fun map, so I think people would have a brilliant time on it.
I think that the keeps and the towers on EOTM are actually some of the best designed keeps and towers on any World vs. World map, including like Borderlands map and EVG maps. So,
well, they did a lot of cool things with EOTM, and I spent a lot of time in EOTM, when it was early creation of it, right? And it was out. They have other cool things like bridges are destroyed. You know what I mean? So like if you're, working on defending and you only want to defend from one side of your keep, well, you can, breaking bridges and stuff like that would prevent things from happening. And it just, there's a lot of, there's a lot of narrow bridges. So you're talking about like, you have to be very careful because if you get feared off or fall off the edge, and I don't know if you guys played around that time period when this was big and people,
Yep.
the necros would put a fear wall and you just lose an entire squad off the edge of something, right?
Yeah, because that bridge is not a lot wider than the ring.
I have a hilarious story about the bridges. It was one of those times when, I mean, this was years probably ago when we got queued out and we were on EATM and we went over a bridge and we were trying to kill this NPC and he just wouldn't die. And it turned out we were trying to take over the enemy spawn. So we just didn't realize that was actually the enemy spawn.
And there's some gates that you walk out. You walk out of a portal, and if you're not paying attention, you walk out that portal. You're 2 steps, kind of like when you walk into bay from the, if it's your bay, you walk through the portal, and you walk too far, you'll walk into the water. Well, there's some edges that you walk too far, and then you walk all the way off the edge.
The Earthkeep experience. There's a bunch of portals in Earthkeep that do that to you these days as well.
Yeah, so you have that. There's just a different feel to it, which allows for different variants of fight. And I've always thought that EOTM is so underutilized. I'd say right now 99% of EOTM that's used is, or actually let's go with 95% of it's used for GVG. 5% of it's people look at their weekly and say, oh crap, I need to cap whatever something in EOTM. Why don't we just go there and do it? And they cap 1 or 2 things and leave, 3 things and leave. And that's it. So it's not even, the scores there are irrelevant. So how, like I said, how can we kind of move that into something that would become useful to the game? And during a time zone that's struggling to find people to play against each other. And if we lose and it doesn't work, turn it off. But I mean, really, where all that really needs to be really changed with it is add gliding and add mounts. You know what I mean? I know that's a big jump for them, but we don't, in OCX, we don't create points in the skirmish to create points for the war score anyways, so the war score for us doesn't mean anything. So give us something to do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at 1 hour and 15 minutes on my OBS overlay, but I also want to make sure that Blaze has an opportunity to give final thoughts on whether there's things the community can do or whether there's things that ArenaNet can do to improve the play experience for off-hours time zones, and then I think we'll go ahead and wrap up.
I just think that they need to bring back the scoring and reasons to win. They just need to have a reason to win it for it to make a difference.
Yeah. And I think in the studio update at the end of 2024, they did say that was something that they were going to be working on. That might be a heavy Wikipedia citation needed on my end. But I would expect that to happen at some point in the trajectory of 2025. And, at this point, after talking to all of you and some other representatives from the off-hours communities and, also some people in NA Prime, hopefully it's something that is able to get iterated on fast enough that it catches people before they bleed out of the game mode entirely. Because I definitely think that there's normal activity drain that happens when you're a 13-year-old MMO, unless you're something very special, like World of Warcraft Classic or EVE Online or old school RuneScape or something like that. Over time, you just tend to bleed player base, and that's a normal part of being a game online as technology evolves. But with how important the social fabric is to World versus World, it would be nice if there was a way that we could get some updates that would help to hold these communities together and keep them having fun in the game mode until whatever the next project from ArenaNet and NCSoft comes along is. So that's where I'm going to put a pin on this episode, just to make sure we're kind of sticking to that 1 hour plus or minus 15 minute sort of metric that I'm working with. But I want to thank all of you so much for giving me your time tonight. Thank you for everybody who has sat through the video this long. If any of you are interested in playing with off-hours communities, I'm going to have some links in the video description to the regional discords for OCX and C. And if any of the panelists here are looking to recruit for their guilds, I will also have their contact information in the description as well, so that you can go ahead and reach out to them. I think the plan for the March episode, this is technically the February episode, even though we're recording it on March 8th, just because the scheduling has been difficult. The plan for the March episode is going to be about the public tag experience and the public player experience. That's something that's been alluded to pretty heavily in this episode, so I'm really looking forward to recording that as well. And if you'd like to be notified for when that video comes out, again, leaving a subscription to the channel or leaving a comment on the video or even just giving it a thumbs up is a great way for you to let me know that you're interested in this kind of podcast material and you want me to keep working on those. So I will see you guys around for the March episode. Thank you again so much to my panel of guests for stopping by tonight, and I will see you around next time. Take care and have a good rest of your day.